Deadlines usually yield results, but as we head into day 90 of the MLB lockout, the only result is more bad blood. On December 2nd, the MLB owners, in lockstep with the expiring of the CBA, instituted the lockout as a defensive maneuver. Then the decision to cancel regular season games if a new deal was not struck by the 28th, which turned to March 1st, was made. Some of the main sticking points in the negotiations include expanded playoffs, competitive balance issues, and of course, money, money, money. Kyle, are you surprised that an agreement was not reached?
Not at all, because I said back on December 10th, which was just an arbitrary day that we recorded the Take It Easy podcast on the lockout, games are going to get canceled. More games are going to get canceled because canceling 4% of the season is not really enough to move either the owners or the union members to flip their side of the issue. Because right now, the players are willing to sit out and owners are willing to lose games in order to avoid a compromise, in the hopes that one of the sides will fold and ultimately they will come to an agreement. More games will get canceled because you're going to have to cancel a significant number of games for either, I believe, 23 of the owners to vote in favor of just whatever the favorable deal is for the players, or for 601 of the players, which is 50% of the 1,200 players represented by the union, to vote and say, we'll take whatever deal we get. We just need to go play baseball. To get to that point, it's probably going to take canceling more than a month of games, but probably won't take canceling more than a year of games. I don't know in between where that number is when one side will decide to flip and say, we're going to fold, we're going to give up our hand, and we're willing to come back. Whether the owners get broken or the players get broken, I'm not really sure who's closer, because it's really hard to line up 1,200 Major League Baseball players and say, how many games would you be willing to sacrifice for the cause? How many games would you be willing to sacrifice? And see how many everyone would be willing to sacrifice. Being 100% honest, we can't really do that. We also can't really figure out how many games the owners would be willing to lose, although it's easier to figure out 30 people's willingness to lose games. The point still is more games are going to get canceled. I don't know how many more games are going to get canceled. There's also the possibility of a compromise, which benefits all parties, but because in union negotiations, not just in sports, but in all industries, both sides have an incentive to lie to each other about what they want. It leads to some distrust. No fault of anyone involved. There's just distrust around the situation. Because of that, you're going to see games get delayed as a negotiating tactic, when in reality, both sides don't really care that much if games get canceled. Players are going to get full service time like they did during the pandemic season. The owners, most of the revenue comes from postseason television contracts. The only revenue that's being lost is at the gate for people paying to go watch those 20 home games that might get lost, or 40 home games that might get lost, which is significant revenue, but relative to the billions of dollars Major League Baseball is making, they're still going to bring in a significant amount of revenue. As long as they host a postseason, that's where most of their revenue gets guaranteed. So in the grand scheme of things, more games are going to get canceled. I can't tell you exactly how much, although I will say it'll be more than a month of games getting canceled, but less than a year of games getting canceled. I don't know where it's going to be in between, but it's going to be somewhere between that. This was an inevitable step, was them not coming to a deal the first week of games getting canceled. In 2 weeks, 3 weeks, maybe more, a deal getting done, I would suspect.
Well, the carrot dangling in front of us is the fact that they didn't cancel April outright. They canceled just a couple series as of this point. So that shows that the MLB is not ready to just completely give up on that first part of the season, although it does seem likely. A core date to look at is going to be March 31st. That's going to be when cash flow starts. So that's going to be when players actually start getting paid for their games. You mentioned they may still be able to get full service time out of this year, but I think a big problem with them missing games is now you have to renegotiate. Are you still going to get paid for the games that you lost? In COVID, it was a little bit easier to understand that because we all kind of more or less agreed that that season was going to be shortened. This one now, being that it's the league instituted lockout, players are going to be a little less understanding if they don't get their full salaries. And that may be a make or break on whatever this next deal is, whenever they decide what is a full season, how many games it's going to take, how many teams are going to be in the postseason. It did seem like in the final hours of that negotiation, Some good things did start to happen though. And that does give me, again, a little bit of ability to take a deep breath because universal DH seems popular on both sides. Anti-tanking policies, instituting a draft lottery seems to be very popular on both sides. As of right now, expanded playoff, service time manipulation, cutting down on that. I know that that's been a big point of contention going back to Chris Bryant, who had to achieve 172 days in the MLB to achieve a full season. And he had famously 171 because the Cubbies knew, hey, let's just leave him in the minors just to sit for a little bit and not bring him up on opening day. And we get another year out of Chris Bryant. So because of instances like, of course, caused the distrust. That's caused the issues why players are pushing back. Also, when you hear about shitty things like the title bout that was given to owners for cutting down on player arbitration salaries, and you hear about revenue going up while player salaries are going down consistently over the last 4 years, those are all shitty things. And that's where, you know me, Kyle, I'm pro fan, which usually means I'm pro management, I'm pro owner, but I do see a little bit of ground to the players in this negotiation because while you hear instances like that, you hear instances like the title bout and the revenue and everything going against the players, you hear about them losing out on the last 2-3 CBA agreements. And that does start to give you a little bit of compassion, but still at the end of the day, I do also put a little bit more onus on the players than a lot of other like pundits about this issue, just because at the end of the day, it takes two to tango. It takes two to make an agreement happen. And it seems like the players are slightly unwilling from what I'm seeing, because it did seem like at least in that final hour of negotiation, the MLB did start to cede ground on a lot of issues. The big one that they haven't ceded ground on, and this is going to be the one that kind of makes or breaks this, is going to be the CBT. Basically serves as a salary cap, a like soft salary cap for the league.
Salary cap for everyone except the Dodgers, like a salary cap for everyone. And then the Dodgers just spend 70 million more than it.
Yeah, because there's just going to be some teams that are so financially gifted that they can afford to spend over the luxury tax consistently. Although the Dodgers have been trying to cut down on their salary as well. So I think the Dodgers, although they can, sometimes they are less willing to. And I think a big problem too is I think there should be a salary floor, because you hear about teams like the Pirates who only spend 50 million in revenue. And I think that's equally as big of a problem. So I think that baseball needs to figure out the salary floor and the salary threshold. And it sounds like they're about like 10 million apart. When you hear about like only being like about 10 million apart on that, that's not that huge to me. That's not that bad. Like I feel like at 10 million, you can work with it. I think there's a light at the end of the tunnel. And it does seem like you mentioned, we're going to get the postseason. We're going to get the World Series. I think everyone's being very reactionary and freaking out about this one. But I think at the end of the day, things are going to work out in favor of baseball fans. The one thing I kind of want to throw that to you as well is Rob Manfred. Rob Manfred's been taking all the slings and arrows, and some of it's deserved. A lot of it's deserved. But I will say this, Rob Manfred, he has a boss. In fact, he has 30 bosses. We all have to answer to what our bosses tell us to do. And Rob Manfred is just the poster boy for like what the owners are saying. Like I am more plugged into baseball than the average person. You're more plugged into baseball than the average person. And we still probably can't name more than half the owners, but we can name Rob Manfred off the top of our heads. And I think that's why he's received a lot of hate. And it all goes back to, of course, the Astros scandal. Like everyone would just like to inscribe over Rob Manfred's tomb the famous words of, the World Series trophy is a piece of tin, akin to a kindergarten science project of just gluing together a bunch of aluminum cans. That's what Rob Manfred kind of compared the World Series trophy to, and baseball fans haven't let him forget about it. What do you think about the idea that Rob Manfred is the fall guy here?
In my mind, I'm trying to think if I can get 15 owners. And I think if I count Patrick Mahomes and I count the former owners of the Mariners, who are the Nintendo people, I think I can maybe get to 15, but still, actually Stephen Cohen, 16. I can get to 14. Anyways, so the interesting part about Manfred is Rob Manfred is someone who essentially works to break unions. He's been a baseball lifer in the front office. He was the guy during the biogenesis scandal that was prosecuting Alex Rodriguez. Rob Manfred has been a baseball lifer trying to break unions, and he's incredibly unpopular even by commissioner standards, because Rob Manfred does not come from a quote unquote baseball background. He's been in baseball forever, but Rob Manfred is originally a labor lawyer and happened to find his way into baseball and was really good at breaking unions during the 2005 union negotiations. My year might be off there, but it was the one after the 1999 lockout that was saved at the 11th hour. He was really good at negotiating then. Baseball always used to get screwed by the Players Association in deals. And so it was bringing in people like Rob Manfred that kind of turned the tides in favor of ownership. And then when Rob Manfred replaced Bud Selig instead of John Henry, who is a baseball person, owns the Boston Red Sox, previously owned the Florida Marlins. When Rob Manfred got the job over him, it was a sign that baseball was really, really invested in a commissioner that could break unions. And that seemed to be what baseball's priority was, more than someone as a caretaker of the game, or more than someone who was, in the case of Bud Selig, more of a baseball guy. They wanted someone who could break unions as their commissioner and someone who could negotiate a kick-ass television contract for the playoffs.
The good thing, though, if you're the MLBPA, if you're Tony Clark, is that you have Rob Manfred painted as such a villain. That way, when fans are talking about why they don't have baseball, they have someone they can point the finger at and say, look at that guy, look at that idiot who's talking. That's our enemy right there. So Rob Manfred is the best thing that the MLBPA has going for it, because they've done a great job, of course, putting themselves as the victim of this whole negotiation here, which is smart by them, because in the way that the internet works, in the way that Twitter works, certainly being the victim in a negotiation works towards your advantage, and gain the court of public opinion to shine in your favor is 10 times out of 10 going to be what eventually gets a deal done, gets a lot of pressure done to the MLB in this whole thing. So they're doing a good job, at least, of painting Rob Manfred as the idiot, the village idiot. And in fact, I would not be surprised if you told me the MLBPA has a few burner accounts. They're just tweeting out Manfred memes just left and right. I mean, we've seen burner accounts from KD. We've seen burner accounts from Philadelphia 76ers GMs. If some MLBPA heads told me, okay, we can manipulate social media to get on our side here, I would not be surprised.
I like the idea of Jack Flaherty creating a burner account to send out mean messages about Major League Baseball. I like this idea. I'm also mad that I can't remember the name of the Cubs owner, because that would be an extra one that I forgot in there. I think I could maybe get half of the owners in that game, but even still,
better than me, friend. So
yeah, it's slightly better, but it's still the point that you were making with Manfred is correct. I think that because Major League Baseball had those 2 or 3 years where like free agency dragged out into spring training, I think it was like Eric Hosmer signed right at the start of free agency of spring
that's a
training.
Really good point, though, you mentioned there, because the more things get pushed back, we also got to talk about there still is going to probably be 4 weeks of spring training, and then we still have all these free agents to sign too. So that's probably going to push it back another couple of weeks.
Exactly. And spring training will have to be at the bare minimum 3 weeks. So that's why by March 15th, 2 more weeks of games are going to get canceled. You can book it. It will be 2 more weeks of games canceled. They will cancel all games in April. They may start canceling games in May. I'm not 100% sure, but trust me, all the games in April are going to get canceled. To the point on Manfred still, Manfred really took a hit then within the Players Association. And I think the Astros scandal kind of put it over the edge, because the Astros scandal became the thing that union leaders could point to and unify the players around. Look at this joker.
Which is ironic, because in a way he was protecting players. One of my biggest issues with the entire Astros investigation is that no players ended up getting suspensions out of it, which is smart, because of course you want the most information as far as what actually happened. So you're going to grant certain people immunity. But that was the big sticking point towards a lot of fans, was that no players saw anything. So the fact that he was actually somewhat defending MLBPA representatives and Jose Altuve and Carlos Correa and whoever else knew about the scandal at the time, Carlos Beltran, also throw him in there.
But Carlos Beltran got screwed on that one, because Carlos Beltran wasn't a player.
Yes, and he ended up, of course, losing his head coaching job, or managerial job, I should say. We're on tracking baseball after all. Ended up losing the managerial job. And obviously, you look at the Astros front office and their manager, they ended up losing their job. So that was really the only extra shrapnel from that. So yes, the MLBPA, they are running the perfect 21st century negotiation by using all their resources to get on their side. The one thing I would say is just like, in terms of this negotiation is I think the fans also kind of have to understand that we're also asking businessmen to make bad business decisions. We're asking businessmen to make a deal against their own best interest. And a lot of these guys, even if we can't name them all, are very well respected in the business world and didn't get that way by making bad business deals. That's where it becomes a point where, do I think the owners are going to take less or take something that goes against their best interest to just put some games on the field? I would very much doubt it. And if they end up having to see to the players and end up having to boost player salaries, they're going to have to earn back that money somewhere else. Where that somewhere else is made, it may be against the fans too, and raising like ticket prices, raising concessions, raising parking, whatever way they can get extra money out of it. So even in that self, players are positioning themselves as the champions of the fans here. But if prices start to raise, then that facade of just being the pure intention, we're doing it for the fans, starts to fade as well.
Well, that idea faded for me. I believe it was 5 years ago. It was when it began when the Chargers left San Diego for me, but ever so slightly that facade faded away. This is not about the fans. It is the greatest line I've ever heard about this is fans want to have an emotional relationship with their teams where they can invest and feel love and feel trusted. And the teams are like, baby, this is prostitution, man. You are giving us money and we are providing you feel good. And that is kind of the idea with that. But to your point, you are correct. This does very much alienate fans who feel an emotional connection to the team, because when I don't have an emotional connection anymore to sports, other than like, I really, really love the idea of sports more than I like leagues themselves or teams themselves or institutions. I still really love the sport, but I don't watch as much sports as I used to. I'm not giving as much money to sports as I used to because I recognize how silly all of this stuff actually is. I still love it, but it's not the same way it used to be as a child. And so that will end up happening for a lot of people. And this lockout gives people an excuse to, the same way the Astros scandal gave people an excuse to yell and blabber about baseball. Because my hatred with the Astros scandal is for the exact opposite reason everyone is upset about the scandal. I'm like, this was the biggest crime and punishment situation baseball's had in 50 years. You got a Hall of Fame general manager and 3 managers fired from their jobs as a result of this scandal, and people wanted more people punished. I'm like, no, less people get punished for this situation. Just learn and adapt instead of just trying to punish the people who got in trouble. But all of that still, bring it to baseball. You're right. The way that this has been a rallying point for players leaves owners in a compromised position, because it's just how much are you willing to absorb either of a financial loss or then pass those losses on to the players or the fans.
And not to really care about how much money owners lost during COVID, but they did lose a lot of money during COVID. That's why we're even also talking about potentially expansion franchises, because that's one way to potentially recoup that cash.
There is an important way to phrase it. They were still making money. They were just making less revenue than they used to. It's an important way to phrase it so people don't think these poor broke billionaires. They were making money. They just made less money than they would have normally made. And the way they compensated for that, there are 2 ways. Basic economic principle. If you want to maximize revenue, you increase your profits or you decrease your costs.
Which increase 60-game regular season and not paying the players their full salary.
Yes, and not paying players full salaries. And when people come back, increase the prices of tickets and increase the prices of beer and increase the prices of $16 stadium nachos at Petco Park, which I will pay for no matter how expensive you make them, because
that good?
They're good, man. They got some carne, they got some nacho cheese, sour cream, onions. Oh, it's God.
That's someone that also deserves a little bit of talk in this whole thing. We focus so much on the players, but there's also stadium workers that are losing out on jobs because of this. There's the parking attendants that are losing jobs because of this. So there is an economic effect to people that aren't actively playing baseball. Thankfully, there's still the minor leagues. So at least there's players and fans and workers that are still getting paid to do that. But in terms of the actual MLB product, that's a lot of jobs. That's a lot of people who work on game days at the ballpark that aren't like seeing their share of the money themselves. So I don't know if they'll ever be compensated in the right way for it.
Well, not only that, they are not only not getting to work, they also aren't protected under the union because Major League Baseball Players Association has created a safety reserve. So beginning March 31st, or maybe it started yesterday, I'm not actually sure, but they're going to send out $15,000 a month checks to players, which is obviously across 12 months, only $150,000. So it's, a sixth of what the minimum salary is or a fifth of what the minimum salary is. But it's also more than Randy Arozarena made during that season where he hit 11 homers in the playoffs, because with a shortened season, he made the equivalent of $90,000 that season. And they had a great poster for the World Series where Randy Arozarena was standing next to Mookie Betts, who had just signed a $340 million contract, while Randy Arozarena made $90,000 during that Rays run in 2020. And it was a perfect photo to encapsulate what it is that the union is fighting for: minimum salary increases and increases to the competitive balance tax, because the Dodgers can just sign Trevor Bauer for $45 million and be like, oops, whatever, we'll go trade for Max Scherzer now. Or, teams with big money, the Red Sox, the Cubs, throw tons of money out. Speaking of throw, I just threw my pencil. Throw tons of money out there, and other teams have these gigantic salary floors, whether it be Tampa or Pittsburgh or Baltimore, or teams that are just actively not trying to win and cutting costs. So that's the disparity that is also being fought for right now. Without union protections, a lot of people in Major League Baseball that aren't players are not going to get protected in this situation. And it is unfortunate, but they also don't have bargaining power, and society kind of stinks because Major League Baseball has a union. It's incredibly rare for people in private sector jobs to have unions in America.
Well, I'm just going to cross my fingers and hope that we have baseball games by May. And if you're Rob Manfred and the MLB and you're hoping to bring fans back, I propose this: the rest of the games played exclusively in Iowa. We get just exclusive Field of Dream games, because that's the only time I've ever heard anyone praise anything that baseball has done in the history of ever.
Well,
let's just do all the movie themed games on the Sandlot, Bull Durham. We'll just do them all.
Angels in the outfield. I don't even know what stadium that was.
That's probably the only thing that people cared about the Angels for.
What field was it in that in the rookie of the year, the kid who was that just Wrigley Field, or
that
what
was
about
Wrigley Field? Yep, that was for the Cubbies.
Well, that one doesn't really
Same
count.
goes for the Angels, just doing it out there in Anaheim. But
what about that movie where the 38-year-old ends up, where Dennis Quaid 38-year-old becomes a major league pitcher?
Well, he ended up pitching for the Rays, so I guess in theory he would have pitched at Tropicana.
I guess that's, oh God, that baseball wants nothing to do with that. Then baseball's like, to hell with Tropicana. I think he actually made his debut in Texas. So you can play games at the old Texas Ranger Stadium that's across the street from that barbecue grill of a stadium that they built in 2020.
Give me all the cornfields in the outfield. Seeing the home runs disappear into that was majestic.